I had always thought of birthdays as milestones, markers of time that invited a mixture of celebration and reflection. My 48th was supposed to be no different, a cozy gathering of family, friends, and neighbors in our Houston home. The weather was crisp but comfortable, and the faint scent of brisket smoking on the grill wafted through the open patio doors. My wife, Vanessa, had outdone herself with the decorations. String lights draped across the backyard, casting a warm, golden glow over our guests. She floated between the crowd in a sleek burgundy dress, a hostess to the core, offering drinks and chatting with neighbors as if she lived for these moments. Our daughter, Sydney, was there too, perched near the kitchen island, laughing with her friend Amanda as they nibbled on appetizers. I was moving through the crowd with a drink in hand, exchanging pleasantries, when the first inkling of unease settled over me. It wasn't anything obvious, just a lingering feeling that something was off. I noticed Vanessa and Sydney slip into the pantry together. A brief moment of eye contact between them, almost conspiratorial, caught my attention. It could have been nothing, but as I greeted one of my colleagues near the drinks table, I realized I was barely listening. My mind kept pulling me toward the pantry. It wasn't like them to sneak off like that during a party. I excused myself casually, pretending I was headed toward the kitchen to grab another beer. But instead of going to the fridge, I found myself lingering just outside the slightly ajar pantry door. At first, I heard nothing but the rustling of bags and the clink of glass jars. Then Sydney spoke, her voice soft but distinct. "Thanks, Mom. I really needed this. I don't know how I'd get through work without Tyler." There was a pause before Vanessa responded, her tone light, almost teasing. "Just remember not to get too attached. He's good for one thing, Sydney. Don't go complicating it." I froze, my hand gripping the doorframe as if to steady myself. "Tyler? Sydney's personal trainer? Good for one thing? What was she talking about?" Sydney laughed nervously. "Don't worry, Mom. I get it, but I have to say sharing him with you has been different." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Sharing him? I held my breath, hoping I had misheard, praying there was some innocent explanation. But Vanessa's next words crushed that hope entirely. "Well, at least you get it. Unlike before." She chuckled softly. "Tyler isn't the first, you know." The blood roared in my ears as my mind raced to piece together what I was hearing. This wasn't just about Sydney and Tyler. Vanessa's casual tone, the way she spoke about it like a shared secret, it painted a picture I didn't want to see. How many Tylers had there been? I had to steady myself, pulling away from the pantry door as quietly as I could. My pulse thundered in my ears as I tried to compose myself. I couldn't barge in there. Not yet. I needed to process what I had just heard, figure out what I was going to do. I wandered back toward the patio, weaving through the guests. My hands were shaking, so I stuffed them in my pockets. Across the yard, I spotted Tyler standing near the grill and chatting easily with some of the guys from my office. He looked so relaxed, so damn comfortable, like he had every right to be here. I clenched my fists, resisting the urge to storm over and confront him. Not yet. Not here. But as I watched him laugh and sip his drink, the bile rose in my throat. The man who had apparently been sleeping with not just my wife, but my daughter as well, was standing in my backyard, enjoying my hospitality. Forcing myself to turn away, I scanned the crowd again. Vanessa was back in the thick of it, laughing with a group of neighbors as if nothing had happened. Sydney had joined a small circle of her friends, her carefree demeanor a stark contrast to the words still echoing in my mind. I couldn't think straight. All I knew was that everything I thought I understood about my life, my family, had been shattered in the span of a few overheard sentences. The words from the pantry kept ricocheting in my mind as I stepped into the backyard again. The golden lights strung overhead suddenly felt too bright, the music too loud. It was as if the party was mocking me, celebrating my birthday, while my world quietly crumbled beneath my feet. Then I saw him. Tyler. He was standing near the grill with a glass of whiskey in his hand, grinning as he bantered with one of my colleagues from work, Paul. The sight of him made my blood boil. How could he stand there, so relaxed, knowing what he had done? I clenched my fists and started toward him, the noise of the party fading into the background. My pace quickened with each step, and by the time I reached him, I wasn't thinking clearly anymore. All I could see was his smug face, and all I could feel was rage. "Tyler," I said, my voice low but sharp enough to cut through the hum of conversation around us. He turned to me, his expression shifting from amusement to confusion. "Marcus." "Hey man," he began, but he didn't get the chance to finish. I swung before I could stop myself, my fist connecting squarely with his nose. The impact was solid, a sickening crunch that left no doubt in my mind I had broken it. Tyler stumbled back, blood streaming down his face as he let out a shocked yell. His whiskey glass fell to the ground and shattered, drawing the attention of everyone nearby. The party fell silent. Conversation ceased mid-sentence, and all eyes turned to me. A couple of gasps broke through the stillness. Someone muttered, "What the hell?" Tyler staggered, clutching his nose, his eyes wide with disbelief. "What the hell is wrong with you, Marcus?" he shouted, his voice muffled by the blood pouring from his nostrils. "What's wrong with me?" I bellowed, my voice shaking with fury. "You have the audacity to stand here, in my home, after sleeping with my wife and my daughter." The crowd collectively sucked in a breath. Tyler froze, his bloodied hands still cupped around his nose. "Dad!" Sydney's voice rang out from the kitchen door. I turned to see her rushing toward us, her face pale and her eyes wide with panic. Behind her, Vanessa appeared, her expression a mix of shock and anger. "Marcus, what the hell are you doing?" Vanessa hissed as she hurried to my side. I ignored her, my focus on Tyler. "You thought I wouldn't find out, didn't you? You thought you could sneak around with both of them, and I'd never figure it out." Tyler stammered. "This isn't what it looks like." "Shut up," I snapped, taking a step closer. "Don't even try to deny it." Sydney reached us, grabbing my arm. "Dad, stop. You're making a scene." I turned to her, incredulous. "A scene? Is that what you're worried about right now, Sydney? How about explaining what I just overheard in the pantry?" Her mouth opened, then closed, her face flushing red. She looked to Vanessa for help, but Vanessa was too busy glaring at me, her jaw tight. "This isn't the time or place for this, Marcus," Vanessa said through gritted teeth. "Really? And when would be a good time, Vanessa? Should I wait for Tyler's next appointment with Sydney, or maybe his next visit to your bed?" A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. The neighbors were practically salivating over the drama unfolding before them, their awkward attempts to look away doing nothing to hide their curiosity. Sydney tried again, her voice trembling. "It's not what you think, Dad. Tyler has been helping me." "Helping you?" I interrupted. "Helping you do what?" "Destroy this family." "I didn't mean for it to get so complicated." Sydney blurted out. "Mom said it was fine. She said you wouldn't understand. But it was okay." The weight of her words slammed into me like a freight train. "She said it was fine?" I repeated, turning to Vanessa. Vanessa finally spoke, her tone sharp and defensive. "Marcus, you don't get it. You've been so distant, so caught up in your work. You don't see how much pressure Sydney's been under. Tyler has been a support system for her. And for me. You've been checked out for years." I stared at her, stunned by the sheer audacity of her words. "You're seriously trying to blame this on me? You're sleeping with him, Vanessa. And you dragged our daughter into it." Vanessa crossed her arms, her expression hardening. "Don't twist this around, Marcus. It's not as black and white as you're making it out to be." "Not black and white?" I laughed bitterly. "You're unbelievable." At that moment, a voice piped up from the crowd, hesitant and quiet. I don't mean to interrupt, but I think I should say something." Everyone turned to look at Laura, one of our neighbors. She was fidgeting nervously, her face pale. "What is it, Laura?" Vanessa snapped, clearly irritated by the interruption. Laura hesitated, glancing at Tyler, who was still holding his nose and trying to stem the bleeding. I didn't realize Tyler was, involved with anyone else. I mean, we've been seeing each other for a few months." The crowd erupted into hushed whispers, the tension in the air, so thick it was almost suffocating. I couldn't help but laugh, a harsh, bitter sound. "So, Tyler, how many women in this neighborhood are you helping exactly?" Tyler didn't respond. He looked at Laura, then at Vanessa and Sydney, his face pale beneath the blood. Vanessa's composure cracked for the first time, her eyes narrowing as she rounded on him. You told me I was the only one, she hissed. I stepped back, shaking my head. The sheer absurdity of it all was almost too much to process. My wife and daughter had both been involved with the same man, and now it turned out he'd been fooling around with other women in the neighborhood as well. Get out of my house, I said coldly, my voice cutting through the chaos. All of you. Vanessa, Sydney, Tyler, I want you all gone. Now! The silence that followed was deafening. The silence in the backyard didn't last long. The murmurs of the guests started to grow louder, their whispered conversations swirling around me like a storm. My heart was still pounding, and my knuckles throbbed from where they'd connected with Tyler's face. I could see him now, standing off to the side with a towel someone had handed him pressed against his bloody nose. Vanessa stormed toward me, her heels clicking sharply against the patio floor. The mask she had worn all night, the perfect hostess, had been torn away, leaving only raw, furious indignation. Marcus, have you lost your mind? She hissed, her voice rising just enough to carry over the crowd. What the hell do you think you're doing? You've humiliated me in front of everyone. I stood my ground, glaring at her. I humiliated you? You're sleeping with our daughter's trainer, Vanessa, and you let Sydney get involved with him too. Do you even hear how insane that sounds? Her eyes narrowed, and she placed her hands on her hips, the picture of defiance. Don't you dare turn this into some cheap spectacle, she spat. If you have something to say, we can discuss it in private like adults. But no, you had to turn my birthday party for you into some circus. A circus? I repeated, incredulous. You're the one who brought this filth into our house. You and Sydney. And you're worried about your image? Mom, Sydney interjected weakly, stepping between us. Her face was pale, her expression caught somewhere between guilt and panic. Please, let's calm down. Everyone's watching. I rounded on her, my anger barely contained. Oh, don't think you're off the hook, Sydney. You stood there in that pantry and thanked your mother for sharing Tyler with you. How long has this been going on? How long have you been lying to me? Sydney's lower lip trembled, but she managed to stammer. I didn't mean for it to happen, Dad. I didn't. Mom said it was fine. She said you wouldn't understand. Vanessa turned on her daughter with a sharp glare. Sydney, that's enough, she snapped. No, I said, stepping closer. Let her finish. I want to hear it all. What exactly did your mother say? What kind of mother tells her daughter that this is fine? Sydney looked down at the ground, twisting her hands together. She said it wasn't a big deal. That Tyler, that he could help me with my stress, and that it wasn't serious. I thought it was okay because she said so. The disgust in my stomach turned to outright fury. I turned back to Vanessa. You told her this was okay? You encouraged her? What kind of person does that? Vanessa didn't flinch. Instead, she crossed her arms, her expression hard and unyielding. You have no idea what you're talking about, Marcus. None. Do you know how much pressure Sydney has been under? How much pressure I've been under? You're never here. You're always working late or staring at your laptop. You have no idea what it's like to carry this family, to deal with everything while you're too busy to notice. Oh, don't even try that, I shot back. You don't get to pin this on me. You don't get to cheat and then act like it's because I work too much. Do you think I was working for fun? I was working to give you this life. Vanessa. Well, congratulations, she said bitterly, throwing up her hands. You gave us this life, and then you disappeared into it. You don't know the first thing about what Sydney has been going through, about how hard things have been for me. Tyler was there when you weren't. He listened. He helped. Helped. I repeated, my voice rising. Is that what you call it? Helping? Sleeping with both of you is helping. Stop twisting everything I say. Vanessa snapped, her voice shrill now, cutting through the quiet of the crowd. You've been checked out for years, Marcus, and now you want to swoop in and play the victim? Don't act like this is all my fault. If you had been paying attention, maybe none of this would have happened. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Unbelievable. You're actually trying to justify this. You're blaming me for your affair? For letting Sydney. Stop. Sydney cried, tears streaming down her face. Please just stop. I didn't mean for this to happen. I didn't know how it would get so out of control. Out of control? I said, staring at her. It was out of control the moment you decided to get involved, Sydney. Don't you see that? Vanessa stepped forward, putting a hand on Sydney's arm. That's enough, Marcus, she said coldly. You've done enough damage for one night. Damage, I repeated. I'm not the one who betrayed this family, Vanessa. You are. And you can take Sydney and your lies and get out of my house. Vanessa's eyes widened in shock. You can't be serious. Oh, I'm dead serious, I said, my voice like ice. I want you both out? Tonight. Sydney gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. Dad, please, you don't mean that. I mean every word, I said firmly. You've made your choices. Now live with them. But you're not staying under my roof. Vanessa opened her mouth to argue, but the look on my face must have silenced her. Instead, she grabbed Sydney by the arm and started to drag her toward the house. We'll talk about this later, she said over her shoulder, her voice venomous. There's nothing left to talk about, I said as they disappeared into the house. The crowd around me started to disperse awkwardly, the murmurs growing louder as they headed for the exits. No one wanted to linger after that spectacle. I didn't care. Let them talk. Let them say whatever they wanted. The silence in the house was suffocating after Vanessa and Sydney left. They packed in near silence, the only sounds being the soft creak of the stairs and the occasional muted shuffle of luggage wheels. When the door finally clicked shut behind them, I stood in the middle of the living room, staring at the faint imprint their footsteps had left in the carpet. For 25 years, this house had been a home. It had been filled with laughter, arguments, and the everyday chaos that made it feel alive. Now it felt hollow, but not in a way that hurt, at least not yet. It was the kind of emptiness that felt like the precursor to something new. The following morning, the fallout began in earnest. My phone buzzed incessantly, texts from neighbors, colleagues, and even my sister, asking what had happened. The party gossip had clearly spread like wildfire, but I ignored them all. I had bigger priorities. By noon, I was sitting across from Natalie Cruz, the lawyer I'd used for some business contracts in the past. She was the epitome of composure, short-cropped hair, sharp eyes, and a no-nonsense demeanor that radiated confidence. She listened without interruption as I laid out everything that had happened the night before, sparing no detail. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair, tapping a pen against her legal pad. So, let me summarize, she said. Your wife had an affair with your daughter's trainer, encouraged your daughter to have a relationship with the same man, and this has now imploded publicly at a party in front of your social circle? That's about the gist of it, I said grimly. She nodded thoughtfully. And you're sure you want to pursue divorce? There's no question, I said firmly. It's over. Natalie set her pen down and folded her hands. Good. Then here's what we're going to do. First, I need you to start documenting everything. Every financial record, every text message or email, and any witnesses who can corroborate what you've told me. The more evidence we have, the stronger your case will be, especially if Vanessa decides to fight for alimony. She's already blaming me, I said, telling anyone who will listen that this is my fault because I was working too much. That's standard, Natalie said with a wave of her hand. She'll play the neglected wife card. It's predictable, but it won't hold up if we can prove infidelity and financial misconduct. Financial misconduct? I asked, frowning. Affairs are expensive, Natalie said dryly. If she spent joint funds on this trainer or other extracurricular activities, it'll work in your favor. We'll also subpoena her financial records to see if anything stands out. I nodded. It made sense. Cold, calculated sense. That evening, I returned home to find an unexpected package sitting on the doorstep. It was a plain manila envelope, the kind you could buy at any office supply store. There was no return address, just my name scrawled on the front in blocky, unfamiliar handwriting. I brought it inside, setting it on the kitchen counter. For a moment, I hesitated. Who would send me something like this? My first thought was Vanessa, but that didn't make sense. She wouldn't risk leaving a paper trail. Curiosity won out, and I tore the envelope open. Inside was a USB drive and a single sheet of paper with one sentence typed on it. You need to see the whole picture. My pulse quickened. I grabbed my laptop from the living room and plugged in the drive. A folder opened instantly, filled with screenshots. At first, they were just messages, long strings of texts, some from numbers I didn't recognize, others clearly from Vanessa's phone. The content was explicit. Sickeningly so. Messages between Vanessa and Tyler were just the beginning. As I scrolled, I found conversations with other men, multiple men. Some messages dated back years. Promises of secret meetups, explicit photos, requests for money. My stomach churned. It wasn't just Tyler. Vanessa had been cheating for years, using our money to fund her escapades. Hotel receipts, flight confirmations, even a booking for a spa weekend in Austin. All paid with our joint account. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen as the weight of it all sank in. Someone knew. Someone had been watching this unfold and decided I needed to know. But who? The next morning, I called Natalie. "Morning," she said briskly. "I hope you've been gathering documents. We need to get ahead of this." "I have something better," I said. "A package arrived yesterday. It's damning. Messages, transactions, the works. Vanessa's been cheating for years, and it's all here." There was a pause on the line. "That's a significant development," Natalie said. "Who sent it?" "I don't know," I admitted. "There's no name, no address. Just the drive and a note saying I needed to see the truth." Natalie's voice was sharper now. "Don't delete anything. Make copies of everything. We'll need to verify the authenticity, but if it holds up, this changes everything." "Do I tell Vanessa I know?" I asked. "Absolutely not," she said firmly. "The last thing we need is for her to start destroying evidence. Let her think she's still in control. In the meantime, I'll prepare a formal discovery request for her financial records. If she's been using joint funds for these affairs, she's in serious trouble." "Got it," I said. By the afternoon, I was back in the kitchen, staring at the laptop screen. My mind swirled with questions about who had sent the package. Was it one of the other men Vanessa had been involved with? A jilted lover seeking revenge? Or someone closer to me? Someone who had seen the cracks in my marriage before I did? The first time Sydney called, I let it go to voicemail. It wasn't out of spite or anger, though both of those emotions had crossed my mind more times than I could count in the past 48 hours. I just didn't know what I'd say to her. When she called a second time, I stared at the screen as it buzzed on the kitchen counter. Her name glowed in bold letters, and for a moment, I considered picking it up. But then I remembered her silence at the party, the way she'd avoided my eyes, and my hand faltered. It was on the third call, just as I was sitting down with a beer to clear my head, that I finally gave in and answered. "Dad," she said immediately, her voice trembling. "Please don't hang up." I sighed, rubbing a hand over my face. "I wasn't going to hang up, Sydney. What do you want?" There was a pause, the sound of her breathing uneven. I just want to talk. Can I come over?" I hesitated. The thought of seeing her again after everything that had happened, of reopening the wounds from the party, made my chest tighten. But curiosity and a nagging sense of responsibility won out. "Fine," I said finally. "But this isn't going to be easy, Sydney." "I know," she whispered. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. When she arrived, she looked smaller somehow, as though the weight of the past few days had physically diminished her. She stood in the doorway with her hands clasped tightly in front of her, her usually impeccable hair pulled into a messy bun. "Hi," she said softly. I nodded and stepped aside, motioning for her to come in. She entered cautiously, like she was afraid the walls might collapse around her. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where we'd shared so many family dinners over the years. It felt like a lifetime ago. "Okay," I said, folding my arms and leaning back in my chair. "You wanted to talk. Start talking." She nodded, taking a deep breath. "Dad, I'm so sorry," she said, her voice cracking. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." "You didn't mean for it to happen?" I repeated, my tone sharper than I intended. "Sydney, you thank your mother for sharing Tyler with you. How does something like that just happen?" Her eyes filled with tears, and she looked down at her hands. "It's not as simple as it sounds," she said quietly. "I didn't even know how messed up it was until it was too late." "Then explain it to me," I said. "Make me understand, because right now, I don't." She nodded again, her fingers twisting together nervously. "It started months ago," she began. "I was stressed out. Work was piling up, and I felt like I couldn't keep up. Mom suggested I start training with Tyler. She said he was more than just a personal trainer, that he was good at helping people deal with their problems. I clenched my jaw, fighting the urge to interrupt. At first, it was just workouts, she continued. He was nice, supportive. He'd listen when I complained about work, about feeling overwhelmed. It felt good to have someone who understood. And then she hesitated, swallowing hard. And then I found out about him and Mom. I sat up straighter. You found out? How? She bit her lip, her gaze flickering up to meet mine before dropping again. I saw her phone. It was open on the counter one day, and there were texts from him. They weren't subtle. I confronted her about it, and she didn't even deny it. She laughed and said it wasn't a big deal. She laughed. I repeated, the disgust in my voice unmistakable. Sydney nodded, her hands trembling now. She said it was normal, that relationships like that weren't meant to be serious, that they were just for fun. She told me Tyler was good at making people feel better, and that if I wanted, I could talk to him about my stress. I stared at her, my stomach churning. And you believed her? I didn't know what else to think, she said, her voice rising. Mom has always had a way of making things seem okay, even when they're not. She made it sound like it wasn't a big deal, like it was just something people do. So you started seeing him, I said flatly. She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. I thought if Mom was okay with it, then it couldn't be that bad. But it didn't feel right, Dad. It never felt right. And then everything just spiraled. I didn't know how to stop it. I leaned back in my chair, running a hand through my hair. Her words hung heavy in the air, each one adding another layer to the tangled mess of betrayal. And this is what your mother told you, I said finally. That this was normal, that this was fine. Sydney nodded again, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. It wasn't the first time she's done something like this, she said quietly. I froze. What do you mean? She wiped at her eyes, her voice trembling. She's done it before, with other people. She used to flirt with my high school friend's dad, and I thought it was just harmless, but now I'm not so sure. She's always been manipulative. She has a way of getting people to do what she wants. I stared at her, my mind racing. Pieces of the puzzle began to click into place. The subtle ways Vanessa had always seemed to control the narrative in our marriage, the way she could twist any situation to suit her needs. She manipulated you, I said, my voice low. Sydney nodded, her tears falling freely now. I didn't see it until now. I didn't see how much she twisted things, how much she made me doubt myself. I hate her for it, Dad. I hate what she's done to us. I stood abruptly, pacing the kitchen as I tried to process everything. The woman I had shared my life with, the mother of my child, had not only betrayed me, but had dragged our daughter into her toxic web. You need to tell Natalie everything, I said finally. Sydney looked up at me, her eyes wide. You're not angry with me? Oh, I'm angry, I said, my voice shaking. But not at you, Sydney. At her. At what she's done to you, to us. This ends now. She nodded, her expression resolute. I'll do whatever it takes, Dad. I'll help you. I want to make this right. I stopped pacing and looked at her, the determination in her eyes a glimmer of hope in the darkness. We'll fix this, I said. Together. It was only a matter of time before Vanessa made her next move. A woman like her didn't just disappear quietly. She thrived on control and narrative. I was bracing myself, but when the knock came on my door one morning, I still wasn't fully prepared. The courier handed me a thick envelope, the kind that carried more weight than its physical mass. The words "Notice of Divorce Filing" stared back at me as I opened it at the kitchen table. I scanned the papers quickly, my anger simmering as the details unfolded. Vanessa wasn't just asking for a divorce. She was demanding alimony and half of my retirement savings. She claimed I had been emotionally unavailable throughout our marriage, that I had neglected her needs, leaving her no choice but to seek fulfillment elsewhere. It was laughable if it weren't so infuriating. Natalie listened calmly as I vented about the filing later that afternoon. Her expression betrayed no emotion, but her pen moved furiously across her legal pad. She's painting you as the villain, I said, pacing her office. I'm the one who worked long hours to provide for this family. I'm the one who built the retirement fund, and now she wants to take half of it. That's typical, Natalie said, not looking up from her notes. She's playing the victim card. The courts won't just take her word for it, though. We'll challenge her claims. But I need you to stay calm and let me do the heavy lifting here. Calm? I asked, incredulous. She's accusing me of neglect while she's the one who cheated. Repeatedly. And she encouraged our daughter to do the same. Natalie set her pen down and leaned forward, her eyes sharp. And we're going to prove it. Remember that USB drive? That's our ace in the hole. We'll use it to show the court that Vanessa's been living a double life for years. If she wants to talk about emotional neglect, we'll show them how she spent the family's money to fund her affairs. I nodded, taking a deep breath to steady myself. Natalie was right. This wasn't the time to lose my head. The discovery process began almost immediately, and it wasn't long before Natalie uncovered another bombshell. One evening, she called me, her voice carrying a note of triumph I hadn't heard before. "Marcus, I've got something," she said. "We've obtained Vanessa's financial records. There's a loan in your name, $50,000. Did you know anything about it?" "No," I said sharply. "What kind of loan?" "A personal loan," she replied. "She used your signature to secure it 3 years ago. The funds went to a series of payments, luxury hotels, spa weekends, high-end clothing stores. And here's the kicker. The payments align perfectly with the messages we found on the USB drive." My jaw tightened as the realization hit me. So she was financing her affairs with stolen money. Essentially, Natalie confirmed. "This is fraud, Marcus. If we present this to the court, it'll destroy her credibility." Vanessa, however, wasn't going down without a fight. When we met for a preliminary mediation session a week later, she arrived with her lawyer, a sharp-tongued woman named Claire, who looked as though she thrived on conflict. Vanessa's demeanor was icy, her shrill voice cutting through the room the moment the mediator invited her to speak. "Marcus," she began, her tone laced with condescension, "you and I both know this isn't just about the affair. Our marriage has been falling apart for years. You were always working, always putting your career ahead of me and Sydney. I was lonely. You pushed me into a corner, and I made mistakes you forced me into." I couldn't help but laugh, a short, bitter sound. "So it's my fault you cheated? That's what you're saying?" Vanessa leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "You don't get it, do you? You've never gotten it. I needed someone to be there for me, Marcus. You weren't. Tyler was. And the others?" I asked coldly. "Were they there for you too, Vanessa? Or were they just part of your mistakes?" Her expression faltered for a moment, but she quickly recovered. "I made choices based on the situation you created," she said, her voice rising. "If you'd been present, if you'd cared, none of this would have happened." I turned to Natalie, who gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod. She opened her briefcase and pulled out the financial records and screenshots from the USB drive, sliding them across the table toward Claire. "This is what Vanessa's been up to while Marcus was neglecting her," Natalie said calmly. "You'll see evidence of multiple affairs, financed with a fraudulent loan taken out in Marcus's name. These are hard numbers and dates, Claire. Your client might want to reconsider her narrative." Vanessa's lawyer scanned the documents, her expression tightening. "This is inflammatory," she said. "We'll need time to verify these claims." "Take all the time you need," Natalie replied. "But let me make something clear. If you push for alimony or a larger share of Marcus's retirement, we will use this evidence to its fullest extent. And let's not forget, Vanessa's actions have caused measurable harm to their daughter. That won't play well in court." Vanessa's face turned red, her composure finally cracking. "This is ridiculous," she shouted. "You're painting me like some kind of monster, when all I wanted was to feel loved." "Love?" I shot back. "You stole from me, lied to me, and manipulated our daughter. That's not love, Vanessa. That's selfishness." The mediator raised a hand, trying to regain control of the room. "Let's keep this civil," she said firmly. But the damage was done. The facade Vanessa had worked so hard to maintain was crumbling, and she knew it. If there was one thing about Tyler, it was that he knew when to disappear. Since the blow-up at the party, he'd gone into hiding, dodging every attempt I'd made to confront him. He wasn't answering calls, his social media accounts had gone dormant, and his usual haunts were suddenly no-go zones. It didn't take a genius to figure out that he was laying low, trying to avoid the fallout from his disastrous entanglements. But luck, or maybe fate, finally gave me an opening. One Friday afternoon, I was driving home from a meeting with Natalie when I spotted him outside a strip mall gym. He was standing by his car, talking to someone I didn't recognize, his signature cocky grin plastered across his face. My blood boiled at the sight of him, but I forced myself to keep my cool. This was my chance to get answers, and I wasn't going to blow it. I pulled into the lot and parked a few spaces away, waiting for his companion to leave. When she finally walked off, I stepped out of my car and approached him. "Tyler," I said, my voice sharp and cutting. He froze, his eyes widening as he turned to face me. The smile vanished from his face. "Marcus," he said cautiously. I wasn't expecting to see you here." "No, I'm sure you weren't," I replied, stopping just a few feet away from him. "We need to talk." He glanced around nervously, as though searching for an escape route. "Look, I don't think this is the right place." "This is exactly the right place," I interrupted. "You've been hiding since the party, and I'm done waiting. You're going to tell me the truth, Tyler." "All of it." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know what you want me to say, man. Things got out of hand. Out of hand." I snapped. "You slept with my wife and my daughter, and you think you can just brush it off as things getting out of hand?" "I didn't mean for it to happen," he said defensively. "I never planned for any of this. Vanessa, she came onto me first. She was relentless, Marcus. She made it clear that she wanted me, and when I tried to keep things professional, she wouldn't take no for an answer." I stared at him, my jaw tightening. "And what about Sydney? Did she come onto you too? Or was that part of Vanessa's plan?" He hesitated, his eyes darting away. "Vanessa, she's the one who suggested I start working with Sydney. She said Sydney needed someone to help her manage her stress, and that I could, be there for her. I didn't want to get involved, but Vanessa kept pushing it, saying it was harmless, that it would help Sydney. So you just went along with it," I said, my voice dripping with disdain. "You didn't think twice about how sick and twisted the whole thing was?" "I'm not proud of it," he admitted, his shoulders slumping. "I didn't know how to get out of it. Vanessa has this way of making you feel like you don't have a choice." "You had a choice, Tyler," I said coldly. "You chose to betray me, and now you're going to face the consequences." He didn't respond, his gaze fixed on the ground. Later that evening, I told Sydney about my conversation with Tyler. She listened intently, her expression shifting between anger and sadness as I recounted what he'd said. "None of this surprises me," she said quietly. "Why not?" I asked. She hesitated, then pulled out her phone. "Because I have proof," she said. "What kind of proof?" "Text messages," she replied, scrolling through her phone. "Between me and Mom. Between me and Tyler. I saved them because, well, I don't know why. Maybe I knew things would fall apart eventually." She handed me the phone, and I began reading through the messages. They painted a damning picture of Vanessa's manipulation. In one exchange, Vanessa explicitly encouraged Sydney to relax and let Tyler take care of her, assuring her that it was perfectly normal. In another, Tyler expressed discomfort with the arrangement, but Vanessa brushed off his concerns, telling him to focus on keeping Sydney happy. "This is exactly what we need," I said, looking up at her. Sydney nodded, her jaw set. "I'm ready to help, Dad. Whatever you need." The following day, I met with Natalie to show her the messages. She was pleased, though not surprised. "This strengthens our case significantly," she said. "Vanessa's pattern of manipulation is clear, and Tyler's reluctance will work in our favor. The court isn't going to look kindly on a mother who encouraged this kind of behavior in her own child." I felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in weeks. That evening, I reconnected with Beth, an old friend I hadn't spoken to in years. We'd run into each other at a coffee shop earlier in the week, and she'd suggested meeting up to catch up properly. Sitting across from her in a quiet corner of a local restaurant, I felt a sense of ease I hadn't experienced in a long time. Beth was warm and empathetic, and she listened without judgment as I told her about the chaos my life had become. "Marcus," she said gently, "you've been through hell, but you're still standing. That says a lot about your strength." Her words stayed with me long after our conversation ended, giving me a renewed sense of purpose. For the first time, it felt like I wasn't just reacting to the chaos around me. I was starting to take control. The day of the final court hearing arrived with an unsettling mix of tension and inevitability. It had been months since this nightmare began, months of meetings with Natalie, uncovering layer after layer of deceit, and bracing myself for every new tactic Vanessa tried to deploy. As I sat in the courtroom, watching the judge review the mountain of evidence we'd collected, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of detachment. This wasn't just about the money or the house anymore. It was about finally closing the chapter on a life I no longer recognized. Vanessa sat across from me, her carefully curated appearance a mask for the venom she'd been spewing throughout the proceedings. Her lawyer, Claire, had fought hard, but Natalie had been relentless, dismantling their arguments piece by piece. When the judge finally spoke, her words were deliberate and final. Based on the evidence presented, this court finds that Vanessa's claims for alimony are unsupported. Marcus retains sole ownership of the marital home and his retirement accounts. Custody of any remaining joint assets is awarded to Marcus, given the established misuse of funds by Vanessa. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Vanessa's face tightened, her lips pressing into a thin line as the weight of her loss settled in. And one more thing, the judge added, her tone sharp. The court strongly advises both parties to attend separate counseling sessions to address the impact this has had on their family. Vanessa didn't look at me as we left the courtroom. She stormed out with Claire trailing behind her, her heels clicking furiously against the tiled floor. A week later, I learned through the neighborhood grapevine that Vanessa had moved in with Tyler. The news didn't surprise me, nor did it stir any lingering feelings of anger or betrayal. She was no longer my concern. But the whispers didn't stop there. She's already fighting with him, one neighbor confided during a chance encounter at the grocery store. I heard she threw a wine bottle at him the other night. Another told me, Tyler's been seen with other women at the gym. I don't think their little arrangement is working out. I nodded politely each time, but kept my thoughts to myself. Whatever chaos Vanessa and Tyler had created for themselves, it was their mess to deal with now. Sydney, to her credit, had been making an effort. She'd moved out of Vanessa's orbit entirely, renting a small apartment downtown and distancing herself from her mother's toxic influence. She called often, checking in to see how I was doing and sharing updates about her life. "Dad," she said one evening over dinner, "I've been talking to a therapist. I think it's helping." I smiled, genuinely glad to hear it. "That's good, Sydney. You deserve to feel better, to heal from everything that's happened." She looked at me hesitantly. "I know I have a lot to make up for. I don't expect things to go back to the way they were, but I want us to have a real relationship again." "You're my daughter," I said simply. "We'll get there, one step at a time." As for me, I threw myself into rebuilding. The house, once a source of so much pain, became my sanctuary. I painted the walls, rearranged the furniture, and turned the spare bedroom into a home office. Little by little, I made the space my own again, free from the shadows of the past. Beth became a regular part of my life, her warmth and humor a welcome contrast to the turmoil I'd endured. We met for coffee, went on long walks, and talked about everything and nothing. She never pushed, never pried. She simply showed up, a steady presence in a world that felt uncertain. One afternoon, as we sat on the porch sipping iced tea, she looked at me and said, "You seem lighter, Marcus. Like you've finally let go of something heavy." I thought about her words, about the months of anger, betrayal, and heartache. And for the first time, I realized she was right. Life didn't magically fall into place after the divorce. There were still moments of doubt, flashes of old wounds that hadn't fully healed. But there was also a growing sense of peace, a quiet confidence that I was finally on the right path. Vanessa and Tyler's relationship imploded not long after she moved in with him. The rumors of his infidelity proved true, and Vanessa's fiery temper drove him away. She tried reaching out to Sydney, but my daughter held firm, refusing to let herself be pulled back into Vanessa's web. As for me, I found solace in the life I was rebuilding. I wasn't the man I'd been before all of this began, but I wasn't broken either. I was stronger, wiser, and more determined to live on my terms.